Thank you. So let's now call on Alison Li to give us her, as always, very able, skilled summations.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's great. I'm so sorry not to be joining you in person, and I thank our wonderful tech team for pivoting so quickly to patch me in via Zoom. And I'd like to just quickly start by addressing Patricia Brubaker's wonderful question about whether there's recognition of Collop in his hometown. And the answer is a big yes. I'd like to recognize Mr. Rowley Tipper, who I believe was planning to be in your audience today. He is actually the chair of the Collop Memorial Committee in Belleville, Ontario. Is he there, Mr. Rowley? I'm so sorry I'm not able to come to meet you. Chris Ruddy and I were honored to be part of the unveiling of a wonderful monument and memorial garden in Belleville just a few months ago. And it's a wonderful recognition of Collop in his hometown. At the University of Alberta, they erected a plaque marking Collop's isolation of the parathyroid hormone, which he did in Edmonton. And at Western, where he was Dean of Medicine, they named a medical laboratory building in his honor. And Pat, you also asked about Collop's reticence in engaging in the whole debate. And I think part of it was he really was an intensely shy person. And I think he really just wanted to avoid confrontation. Well, it's really a great privilege, but also a bit of a daunting one to have the last word after our three excellent speakers today and our rich and fruitful discussion. This morning's session has brought together in one place new and important scholarship on the life and career of J.J.R. Macleod. And as we've heard, accounts of the discovery of insulin have often shortchanged Macleod, a deficiency that we hope that we have helped to rectify today. We here in Toronto are glad to add our efforts in recognizing Macleod to the important ones that have already been made in Aberdeen by Michael Williams and Kenneth McCarty. As McCarty shared with us yesterday, Michael Bliss's study of the discovery of insulin helped to give Macleod back to Aberdeen. And his 1982 book, and in subsequent lectures and articles, Bliss made a key contribution to rehabilitating Macleod's reputation. McCarty has shown us the long view of Macleod's career. Macleod had the right skills and theoretical background as a result of his education and training in Aberdeen, Leipzig, and London, his years of research experience, his deep knowledge of the literature of carbohydrate metabolism. We've learned of Macleod's passion for writing and his commitment to writing textbooks that would be greatly valued for decades. We've learned that he was a lucid and sought-after speaker. McCarty has shown us that by 1920, Macleod was clearly a well-established academic, administrator, educator, mentor, and researcher, and more than prepared for the events that would be set in motion by the arrival of Frederick Banting in his office in 1920. McCarty has also helped us to understand Macleod's life and career after his return to Aberdeen, his continuing research, lecturing, writing, and administration, which rounded off a long and successful career, though one that remained shadowed by the events in Toronto. In his meticulous paper, Macleod Misunderstood, Misinterpreted, and Maligned, James Wright has given us important new interpretations of several criticisms of Macleod. He has explored Macleod's studies of fish insulin, which paint for us a picture of a methodical scientist with a broad physiological perspective. As Wright rightly points out, while these studies might have seemed a failure from the commercial standpoint, they should actually be seen as valued contributions to the study of the physiology of insulin. Wright also carefully dissects the puzzle about why Macleod allowed Banting to pursue his great idea, even though he must have known it was wrong, and gives us plausible suggestions about why Macleod might have chosen to do so. Wright also provides compelling explanations for the question of why Macleod's name does not appear on the earliest papers. Wright challenges Banting's portrayal of Macleod's training of students as lacking in creativity, and he gives us important new evidence of Macleod's impact as a teacher and mentor, of his generosity in supporting the work of juniors, and his effectiveness in stimulating their intellectual development. And Christopher Ruddy has completed the picture with a valuable discussion of Macleod's role as managing director of the entire insulin enterprise. He shows us that Macleod carried out this critical, though generally underappreciated role with great skill and perseverance, whether it was managing people, evidence, expectations, or the control and manufacture of insulin. It can safely be said that as important as the work of the others were, whether Banting in stimulating the research in the first place, Best in supporting Banting, or Collip in making the crucial purification, that without the guidance, resources, and management of Macleod, insulin would not have happened in Toronto. Together, our speakers have created a rich portrait for us and helped us to understand what a career in academic physiology looked like in the early to mid-20th century. It is not just a picture of breakthrough moments and Nobel-worthy discovery. It's also about long stretches spent following lines of inquiry for years, sometimes only to find out that they are dead ends, and then picking oneself up and carrying on. It's about being open to new ideas and being able and ready to act upon unexpected results. It is carefully husbanding evidence, writing convincing papers, and giving articulate presentations. It is the patient teaching of students and mentoring of juniors. It is the writing of synthetic textbooks that are so crucial in building a shared foundation for an area of study. And it is having the emotional intelligence and political savvy to manage people and institutions with many competing interests. There was clearly a clash of temperament between the protagonists in the insulin story, but as our speakers have demonstrated, there was also a clash of culture, one of them being the difference between the perspective of a clinician with a great idea that proves fantastically fruitful, and that of a career researcher with a long view of how his own work fits into the scientific literature that has come before. A quick comparison of Banting's Nobel Prize lecture with Macleod's gives us a sense of this. Banting's lecture is on diabetes and insulin, and it quite rightly focuses on the clinical use of insulin. The first 2 to 3 minutes give a nod to Zolzer and a very sketchy overview of the treatment of diabetes before 1921. But the bulk of Banting's hour-long lecture was devoted to the work that he had himself been involved in, beginning with his idea of October 1920 and concluding with clinical case histories of diabetic patients that he and his associates treated. By contrast, Macleod's lecture on the physiology of insulin and its source in the animal body is approximately half as long. As you might expect, because of its focus on physiology, in its 12 pages of text, there's just one paragraph that describes the immediate events leading to the purification of insulin for clinical use. The rest of it describes the work of Macleod and his team in elaborating the physiology of insulin. By my estimate, at least a third of it is spent crediting the work of others. Macleod clearly embeds his science in the context of a broader enterprise. Of course, it is the responsibility of scientists to cite their intellectual predecessors and to acknowledge their indebtedness to those who have come before. A scientific paper, as a literary form, creates a clean intellectual lineage, jumping from one citation to the next, disregarding time and place. For historians of science and medicine, however, there's no tidy story. Yesterday's excellent paper by Arlene Tuchman gave us an important counterpoint, reminding us that science and medicine are thoroughly human activities and thus carry with them all the virtues and failings of our humanity. I'd like to also acknowledge that just last week, Professor Tuchman's book, Diabetes, A History of Race and Disease, was awarded the George Rosen Prize of the American Association for the History of Medicine, which is given for a work that has made a significant contribution to the history of public health or the history of social medicine. And I'd like to thank our own Elizabeth Niswell Neswald for bringing this to my attention, and to note that Elizabeth served on the prize committee. So Professor Tuckman's study helps us understand that framing the experimental events that we've been focusing on today, we're shifting ideas of culture, race, and class that help to shape the scientific and medical interpretations of diabetes. In the conflict surrounding the discovery of insulin, there were certainly clashes of personality and culture. But I would like to suggest one final difference: stage of life. After all, Banting, Best, and Collip were all in their 20s. Macleod was a venerable 45. And having reached that venerable age myself, and I admit, having shot far past it, it is tempting for me to see Macleod's virtues, at least in part, as the gifts of middle age. Putting a lie to the popular image of science as propelled by genius, passion, ambition, and ruthless competition, we see instead that Macleod's quieter qualities, dare I say middle-aged qualities of caution, restraint, modesty, generosity, diplomacy, and diligence proved key to the success of the whole enterprise. From the vantage of middle age, we are, I hope, able to reflect upon our own triumphs and failings with a touch of wisdom, grace, and humor. From the vantage of history, we are able to stand apart from the fray of those intense days of 1921 to 23 and to appreciate Macleod's contributions, not only those that were justly recognized by the Nobel Committee, but the many other contributions for which there are no plaques, medals, or prizes, other than the respect of one's colleagues, the esteem of one's peers, and the gratitude and loyalty of one's students. Macleod understood that he was part of a great scientific enterprise, humanity's audacious attempt to make sense of the complex phenomena of life. And in paying tribute to him today, I hope we are also paying tribute to the many other women and men, most of whom will never become household names, but who dedicate their lives to this great work with equal devotion. Thank you.
Alison, thank you so much. That's such a remarkable, beautiful, sagacious, clear-cut summary. Thank you very much. Very well said. I want to move on to the next thing in a moment, but the gentleman from Belleville, would you stand up? Just tell us what you did.
I'm going to have to sit. I had a stroke 6 months ago, so it's difficult to stand for any length of time. So what happened was, excuse me, about 10 years ago, a local doctor, George Pierce, who had trained at Western under Dr. Collip, and he wasn't from Belleville. He was, I think, from Hamilton, but he moved to Belleville in the 60s and opened a family practice, and he couldn't believe that nobody in Belleville had ever heard of Dr. Collip, didn't know anything about him. I mean, they knew Bobby Hull, and they knew Farley Mowat, and they knew Al Purdy, the poet, and Manly McDonald, the artist, but never had heard of Dr. Collip. So he took it upon himself after his retirement, about 2010 through to 2012, by approaching the Historical Society, Hastings County Historical Society, getting them on side. And they approached the City Council of Belleville, who in 2012 decided to declare November the 20th as Dr. Collip Day in the city of Belleville thereafter. And I made a point after that to, and they put a plaque, a beautiful oversized Ontario Heritage plaque right outside our public library. However, nobody seemed to know where it was because it was kind of pointed in the wrong direction. And I made a point every year in November, I'd go around in my travels around the community and say, happy Dr. Collip Day. And they say, what are you talking about? Who's Dr. Collip? So I give the story and had a little bit of a personal connection there. My father-in-law grew up in Montreal. His dad was a physics professor at McGill and a colleague of Dr. Collip's. And he remembers my father-in-law remembers as a probably 12-year-old having Dr. Collop over for Sunday dinner with the family and telling the story about the diabetes discovery. So he knew about that when he was a kid, and he passed it on through his family, my wife, and I heard about it. So Dr. Pierce was doing a tremendous amount of research. I think he wanted to publish a pamphlet or a book, but he got very sick after the declaration of Dr. Collop Day, and the plaque went up, and he died about a year and a half ago, and he never got to finish his work. But he had a banker's box full of research papers in the local library in the archives, which I've read through parts of because I was quite interested in picking up the story. And a friend of mine, a colleague, and both of us retired, and neither of us being medical people. I'm a retired financial planner. He's a retired lawyer. And we said, what are we doing? We have no idea. We're just two guys that want to get Dr. Collop recognized for the great work he did in his hometown where nobody knows about him. And Ian, my friend, and I had both gone to Western in the early 70s. We weren't friends and didn't know each other, but neither of us knew anything about the Dr. Collop building, wouldn't have known what it was. And I thought, that's not right. Here's a guy that did a tremendous amount of important work for one of the most important discoveries possibly in medical history. And he's not even known in his hometown. I should have gone to Western knowing who Dr. Collop was and could have said to my friends from other parts of Ontario, that guy's from Belleville, and here's what he did. I knew nothing about it. So I said, we're going to try to start to change that with the kids in our community. So we put up a couple of awards for the local regional science fair starting 2 years ago. And it's called the Dr. Collop Awards of Excellence in Science. And we had Chris and Alison speak at the monument unveiling last year. And the first winner of one of the awards was this 11-year-old, just terrific young student, just filled with enthusiasm for science and studying, and was so appreciative of winning the award and such. So anyway, once we got past that, then we said, what else can we do? So we thought a monument would make sense. And we played a couple of connections in the political arena and were introduced to Chris and to a gentleman named Doug Daniel at Sanofi Pasteur. And he introduced us to Novo Nordisk. So both of those companies put up significant amounts of money to help pay for the monument in the Memorial Gardens. And that was unveiled last October. And Chris and I have never met because he came down, Alison came down. But unfortunately, the night before the unveiling, I had a gallbladder attack and I was in the hospital. And so this has kind of been, Alison and I are still dodging each other. We've yet to meet personally.
Yeah, I know.
But Chris and I, we've made a connection today, at least at 50 feet. We'll talk later. Yeah. Anyway, so people in Belleville know about Dr. Collop now. Finally, it's right on our waterfront trail, and it's a beautiful setting. And you have to come in sort of off the trail, walk around, read all the inscriptions about the discovery of insulin and all the other work he did at McGill and University of Alberta. And I'm sorry I've gone on so long, but it's something that really caught my interest and passion and represented about 3 years of work. And we finally have something important in our community to recognize a really remarkable man. And I'm intrigued by the fact that Aberdeen has, probably had the same kind of struggles of a prophet not being recognized in his own hometown. And I think the world of what I've heard of Professor Macleod. He strikes me as being just a highly moralistic and sound person. And I'm really glad I was able to attend this and learn more about him too, because I think Collop and he were cut from the same cloth in that sense. And they, unlike Banting and Best, they lived, well, at least Collop, I know, he lived a very happy life right through. Here's an interesting sidebar too, I'll keep going. So when the news got out and was on the internet, we had an email from City Hall saying, there's a family in Georgia that wants to talk to you. Dr. Collip and his wife Ray had 3 children, and the youngest was Barbara. I can't remember her married name, but she was studying at McGill, and I guess was headed towards a pretty good career in science herself when she met a young man studying McGill from Rome, Georgia. So she married him. They went to Georgia and had 5 children. And one of the 5 children's son and wife, they're both majors in the U.S. Medical Corps stationed in San Antonio. And they got in touch with us. And they said, this is really remarkable what you're doing. And we'd like to attend the ceremony when we can. And they made an effort to come up and got to see Chris and Alison and our mayor and our MP and MPP, et cetera. And they were at the unveiling ceremony. So it was kind of an interesting, just shows, the social media, the network we live in.
That's a great story, marvelous story.
Yeah. So all to say, I think at the grassroots level, some things are changing. People in Belleville know who Dr. Collip is, finally, after like 100 years. So
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Willie.
So that was a great summary, and we've had a suggestions that something should be done in the future to continue to clarify things. Now, one of the goals of this meeting has to put this whole recorded set of sessions on our website, and that's taking place. Number 2 is, so that should be on within the next day or so. Number 2 is, it's the goal to publish in the Canadian Journal of Medical History the outcome of this Macleod workshop. And we have co-editors in Chris Ruddy, Jim Wright, and Alison Li. And they're working hard on this, and they'll carry this off, and we'll be in touch with them on this. I sometimes wonder, after hearing all the dynamics in such a stark form, that there should be a playwright somewhere about this. I know it's been a movie,
an opera,
but I'd like to see it on the stage. And that's would be, I think, attractive. And they could call Assembly Macleod. That would, I think, might be a success by someone. But I guess in our discussions in our own committee, when we bounced this around without any specific conclusions, a couple of ideas came forth. One is that on this campus, since Macleod, Batting and Best has been extensively honored, and Macleod has had the honor of having the Macleod Auditorium, the major medical auditorium named after him in 1990, that, and Collip has no special recognition. So that, and the 2 busts that are in the foyer of the medical school, which have been there since the 50s, are only of Banting and Best. And that has also inculcated in people's minds that they were the guys. So that, I guess the suggestions come forth, there should be a new set of sculptures or something like it, a foursome that would include all the 4. I think there could even be a case for having a little bit of Michael Bliss in there, because he unraveled the story in such a brilliant way. Otherwise, this might still be a secret. So, but so I say that's one suggestion. And I did discuss this with the recent Dean, Kathy Whiteside, who led the development of the Norman Bethune statue on the campus. Bethune and Banting were graduates in 1917 medical class. On the class picture, they're right beside each other. Bethune, because of his being in China with the communist effort of Chairman Mao and so on. Some say a bit of a rake, but that's there. So something like that would be, I think, one would greatly break the ice. And we need to sort of push this a bit, discuss this with Dean Young, who was kind enough to introduce this. It gives us a bit of a leeway. That's one possibility. And the other thing that came up in the committee, which is a even larger effort in the extent, in many ways, is to have a larger exhibit or a mini museum that deals with this era, but also in Toronto, we now have the follow-up work in diabetes, and more recently, particularly by Dan Drucker and Bernie Zinman. So there's a 100-year story dealing with diabetes, insulin, and now the various GLP derivatives that have taken place here. So it could be an interesting story, but all that involves resolve, champions, and of course, money. So what I'd like to do is open the discussion. I mean, if I maybe do not to dwell on it too long, so that everybody's out of here by 1 sharp for sure. And maybe we'll take a straw poll of this audience. So a few hands. I'm going to acknowledge all of them. I'm going to take Pat Brubaker first. Then I have 2 hands over here. So let's be patient. Pat, what are you suggesting?
So some of you are probably not aware that I was involved in the creation of the display that actually sits in Mars right now. But this was a Faculty of Medicine display that was put in Mars for a variety of reasons, including public access, because the Medical Sciences building is closed during off hours. When we created the display, as Chris will probably recall, it was actually the original idea was that it was going to be moved in several years and put into a medical discovery museum on the main floor of the 2nd Mars Tower. And that medical discovery museum in the Mars Tower never happened. So I would be absolutely, but the display was designed, in fact, and constructed so as to be able to have it moved.
Right.
And I would suggest that it would be ideal and great timing in association with the new building, which will take a number of years, but I can assure you the number of years it took us to get that display together in the first place was phenomenal. That this is a good lead time, and 100 years of teamwork, discovery, et cetera, in the Faculty of Medicine, in the new Faculty of Medicine building. I would absolutely be in favor of that idea.
Okay, I'll take this lady over here. Maybe you could also give us your name.
Christine Cote. My background is physiology from Manchester University and medical school here in Toronto, class of 81, and then research with ICI, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. I was the vice president there, their corporate office, science and technology. So for me, I always think a huge piece that's missing in medical education is elements of the history, but also how is drug development happening in the past and today and in the future. And I think your point about teamwork and the necessary skills that physicians and researchers need to work and collaborate, because I've worked with a lot of MDs who have brilliant ideas and think they know everything, but don't have the maturity and understanding of the drug development process, or even the physiological exploration process and elucidation and reporting and the rigor that has to go with it. So I think all of the displays and the education and the recognition are absolutely needed. But I think on a bigger picture, getting it into the schools of pharmacy and medicine and any of the other sciences, and people understanding very early on in their learning about science and discovery and the whole procedures and the teamwork necessary and the interdisciplinary nature of the work. And Toronto's fabulously situated for cross-pollination of ideas across all the disciplines to pull it off, way more than a lot of the US businesses and universities. I live in Florida and I've lived in New Jersey and practiced there and in Canada. So I can see both sides of the picture. Yeah.
That's a very good comment. And the gentleman again.
Thank you. Just to piggyback on one of your ideas, sir, a stage play. I've thought about that myself, and I wonder, have you thought about approaching the people at Sheridan College, the artistic director there, for example? They workshopped Come From Away before it went on to its great success, and they had some input on that. And just kind of ironically, you mentioned Norman Bouthine, and they're doing, my understanding is that's their next major play that they're working on, a stage play about his life, and also Sheridan College. So I wonder if they would be the people to approach and say, hey, we've got a story here about a great Canadian, it's a great Canadian story, and it's flawed in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of drama here. And maybe they could do something with it and put it on stage, and it could be the next Come From Away or Hamilton or something like that. You know, you got to think big. And if you want to get it out there and people, then you'd sure get a lot of people understanding what happened in 1921, 22, if it's done right.
Thank you. We'll keep that on the table. Dr. Norby, when I went 3 times to the Nobel events, and I was always impressed going into the museum, how many school children came in to see the record. Just on this idea here is on an immensely smaller scale, but I was impressed while I was there a couple of times, and school children flocked in, and each time to find out about Sidney Brenner or somebody like that. You know, and that must be very much part of education in Stockholm.
Can I make a suggestion for an active program? I'd like to suggest that the University of Toronto establish a program with the University of Aberdeen centered on Macleod carbohydrate metabolism, maybe broader. It could be related to history of medicine, discovery, and whatever, but something which preserves and enhances and continues recognition of this set of discoveries, both here in Toronto and in Aberdeen.
It's an interesting idea.
Well, I'm much better on medicine than I am on history of medicine being taught at Aberdeen University. So there's a very active department in the research facilities on the medical school campus. Mirela Delibegovic is the head of that department, and they're probably working more on type 2 than on type 1 diabetes, but that's a big thing. And we also, of course, what I know much more about myself is a big clinical service also. So there's certainly potential for me to go back. Once I tell them that I've been to the Toronto Medical Historical Association, they'll maybe pay a little bit more attention. And if I, just while I'm on, if I could suggest the title for, let's make it a musical rather than a stage play, and let's call it Macleoder.
Would you give the microphone to Dr. Norby?
Yeah, so this is a very, let's say, wide-reaching topic. We at the Karolinska Institute are not very good at caring for our heritage or displaying that to the public. So there was way back a Museum of Medical History, which is now packed up and not displayed any longer. And then you have the question on the Nobel Prizes, and there was one of the colleagues in the end, the previous century, Nils Ringertz, who pushing that, and eventually a Nobel Museum was established. But there was a very ambitious plans for that, and one can discuss really what one should do with this enormously rich material that we have. And I think the way this is displayed today is just a fraction of what you could do with this material, in all honesty. This has been a little confused by plans for a new museum, and Stockholm City was involved in that, and eventually that failed. So one is still in the old Nobel Museum, which is in the middle of the old city, which in itself is a nice place, but all too small and not at all covering this very wide-reaching topic. There are plans for a new building, but we'll talk about 4 or 5 years from now. But one of those days, I would like to see really a fully developed Nobel Museum. I should mention that when I visited one of the Peace Museum in Oslo, I was rather impressed how they have developed their particular display of the different prize recipients and so forth. But what I would like to see in a modern Nobel Museum would be really highlighting this spectacular gain of knowledge. I mean, it could be very, very comprehensive. But first of all, a Nobel Museum need to define the departure, the little about the Nobel family. How did it come about? And the second part would be, how does it work, or why has been such a success story? How does the different prize-giving institutions develop the tools by which they can select prize recipients, and which has been indeed, I think, a success story, because it is the unique prize of the world. But then it's more than that. One would like to, well, there's so many themes you could develop, let's say, within various fields. You could talk about clinical prizes with the immediate application. You could talk about the evolution of molecular biology. You could take of neurosciences. So there's room for an enormous opportunity of showing how knowledge grows and how really things take off. And so my hope for the future is that we will eventually have a fully developed Nobel Museum, and not only the rather superficial one that we have right now. And that, in addition, should be a place for which would attract school children and so forth. The present museum does attend to school, and this is a very important target group. What is this advancing knowledge, and what importance does it have, and so forth. Because to summarize, it is science and technology that are the prime movers in our society, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to all of us be proud that we represent a society that is generating this knowledge, and hopefully use it for the benefit of the development of our society. So I could discuss at length the ideas for a Nobel Museum, and we'll hope that it will take off in the future. So it's not developed to that state. No, it could be done. Could be done.
Well, we look forward to coming to see that someday. So we're going to move on just to close, but let me just have a straw poll. How many think the idea of having the four discoverers in a sort of foursome should have a place at the University of Toronto?
That could be done pretty quickly too, actually.
How many would think that's kind of a waste of time? So we have one vote against it. Okay.
Well, microphone. I'll give you the microphone.
I would like to make a suggestion. We focus on how we can develop instruments and mechanisms both to attract the leadership, but also the students who can be rewarded, and invest in that process for a better understanding of science moving forward. I think we should get away from idolatry. It's irrelevant now. I think the new sciences that are coming about are demanding, expanding, and very, very worthwhile. And for an example, in the University of Toronto system, we're embarking on a $40 million investment by Novo Nordisk in diabetes in the Mississauga campus. We tend to be so institutional centric, and only St. George campus is relevant. We have before us an opportunity to team up with a major industrial pharmaceutical organization that is putting up $20 million to establish a diabetes community-based educational and treatment center before us. Why not link up with that group and embark on something that can enlist and be exposed to the students who are coming forward in history of medicine, in physiology, in clinical care, and so forth. So I'm not against that. I just think that the payoff would be much greater if we can enlist collaboration.
There are multiple ways to do this. I mean, my own experience, I've been involved with a lot of these over the last while. So I kind of have some insights. The Defining Moments Canada project, Insulin 100 project, might seem a bit small in a sense, but it actually addresses those very issues. It's targeting at high school students nationally. It's not only deals with insulin, but it's a number of key defining moments in Canadian history. We're working on a project about the Bryce report about the Indian residential schools. Anyway, there's a whole series of things, but it's designed to engage with high school kids, particularly, and the public, connecting history with science, medicine, public health, Indigenous issues, and so forth. So there are models. This one is mostly digital, but there are, I mean, that's come out of the pandemic to be more digital than we originally planned. So anyway, there are levels of activities at that level to work with universities and educational groups and a whole range of things to get these sort of stories to the younger generation. So, but that's just one way. Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm sure there are different points of view on it, but
Well,
this is a question of having something durable that commemorates the situation. I would have thought that every dean, every chairman, every leader of the university should obviously have an insight into encouraging young people to enter into the academic field, clinical field, public. Those are everybody's responsibilities. So I want to ask Peter Copeland to come up here. We're going to close in a minute. There's one more hand on just a brief comment from the back.
Any more comments? No, it's not.
He's concentrate. Well, the other larger idea was to have sort of a mini museum. That's
well, there's multiple ways you can do it. So there's things you can do quickly. Other things could be longer term. So I mean, they're all possible. I think there's a lot of goodwill, I think, coming out of this whole process we've been working on.
Well, this committee will ruminate about this, but also we'll need to see what the interest is with the university leadership. So there should be some outcome. So it's time to close. It's been a terrific day and a half with yesterday's outstanding speakers, and I want to thank them all. Ken McHardy, James Wright, Christopher Ruddy, and them again today, Jeff Friedman, Jeff Flyer, Arlene Tuchman, Dan Drucker on behalf of Bernie Zinman, who I hope is recovering well, Alison Li, who gave a great talk and also a brilliant summary just a few minutes ago. If I missed anybody. So all of them spoke well, and we hope we could go back and listen to this on the website very shortly. Brad thinks it'll be very soon. I want to thank our committee that consisted of Peter Macleod, Abby Angel, Alison Li, and Chris Reddy. It was actually a lot of work. And we had to not carry it out because of the pandemic. But I'm very glad we waited and it worked out better. We got increased the domain of our speakers and our topics. We were going to have a one day, we added the Macleod workshop. I think this exercise we had this morning has been very worthwhile and we have to do something with it. So, and it was on the right day when this was announced by JJR 100 years ago. So, and he mentioned everybody. He wasn't excluding anybody. So all that was to the good. And we had a terrific sponsors. Initially we started off with virtually no money, and because the club has no money. It's a total volunteer situation, but we raised enough money from the university, AMS, university, at least 4 or 5 departments, then from Sanofi Vaccines Toronto, and then from Sanofi Pasteur out of Laval, and then from Novo Nordisk, and finally at the end from Lilly Boehringer Ingelheim. And so who would have thought that a volunteer organization could raise money? So all that happened, and we're very grateful that all of you came from far and wide. I missed your lecture, Dr. Norby, when I mentioned the speakers, and it was fabulous to have you hear from all of your experience with the Nobel Prize and the insights also into that 1923 prize to Macleod and Banting. So we also were able to recruit excellent event managers in Sherry Naylor, who's not able to be with us today. She runs a company called Naylor and Associates. Sheila Kay, who's there in green, has been very instrumental about it. And we have a very good AV team. And we're grateful for the facilities of the University of Toronto and their excellent cooperation. Peter, what have I missed?
I don't think you've missed anything, except one. Except one. Is it my turn?
Yeah.
I'll just echo John's thanks to everybody who's participated, and wish those who've come from out of town an old-fashioned phrase, journey mercies on your way home. Christopher has given me the right word. It's impresario. The impresario for this event is sitting to my right. We, the committee, are very grateful for John's work. He's been sort of Scottish modest in what he's done. He's raised a lot of money. You would laugh when he mentioned we're an impoverished club. For many years, until very recently, the dues were $2 a year, until the same Michael Bliss that you heard so much about over the last couple of days suggested they be raised to $5. They're a little more now, but not much.
20,
so
yeah, 20.
On behalf of the club, I want to thank John personally. I don't know whether his wife will ever speak to me again, because this has taken a lot of time and a lot of energy. But we, the club, are very grateful to him. So thank you, John, very much.